Woo!
We were formed to really help the museum, to be supportive of the museum, and I think maybe we could and why we call this cancer tribute, because we don't know about cancer of St. Paul and Island. Down on the museum, they went down on the island, and they were told to do and what things, and go into that old museum, see what they love and what they are here. And we are so fortunate to have this museum here. And we are so fortunate tonight to have Patty Loew speaking, and we want to thank my goodness and my whole crew for creating this space. This is a really exhibit. So thank you so much, bye, and as we go over here.
I'll say a couple of things. I used to always love the no spirits. And I always used to live in spiritual sense. But the fact that break to the country and our ceremonies and lodges and things like that a lot of them, they can travel the cosmos. They can see the bird star. They visit a supernova, star in its light. They're on the far side of the sun. But in a moment of need, in a moment of calm, quick inclination, boom, arrive there. And sometimes I found in my life that sometimes people, and with that being said, I want to introduce Patty Loew, who, when I was chairman, arrived one time with a huge grant, and she started teaching digital filmmaking and sound boarding and digital sound editing to Baton Rouge, and she brought out with her equipment and the knowledge and technical experts, and they interacted with the presenters and leaving behind equipment, leaving behind knowledge and youth, so that they could create their own stories and create their own videos and kind of use the source with it. And it was just a beautiful thing. And like I say, I have a journalist, to professor, to author, to historians, and advocate, and the list goes on. She has all of these amazing kind of identities and pathways that are kind of spread out for her and around her, and she shows us come together and work with her new hand to hand, person to person, day after day, this summer, out shoot videos and everything else. It was just a beautiful thing to watch. It was hard-hearted giving, and I definitely don't think that man is considered at that time in that effort. So tonight, I'll say this, that she's given a talk that is, I think, awesome. Dr. Bolton, Rockford in some sense, and it's about history. And I can tell you that putting some in that here, I was also reminded by a talk Mike Sullivan from LSU who said, you put some concepts out, some indigenous concepts out, stuff about words like that, you're very big to talk about. And I take that part and put some things forward that helps illuminate and get people thinking about what Indigenous to be and how culture interacted with the land, water, was also there, we're ready to talk about it. And, in that sense, there's this cool concept being put forward. Iceland, Madeline, I'm looking forward to this, and Patty Loew talk about it. So, without further ado, Patty Loew.
So my guess is you and I'm not doing this. Okay, so this is the first time I've presented these theories. I'm not checking the dots, I'm putting some dots out there. And any mistakes or misinterpretations are my own and a reflection of if our elders or spiritual people. Who I hope will help me in getting these theories connected at some point. Not yet. This all started 2 years ago when I was in graduate in Copenhagen at the University of Wisconsin Study Center. And I got really immersed in Viking culture and read Icelandic Sagas and talked to the Mashjkiiziibii Ojibwa. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago that for some reason I reread a couple of sagas and realized now as a maturity, oh yeah, they're talking about encounters with native people in these sagas. And so I talked to one of our elders, so some of you know, who was one of the elders, and Professor Jakobsen from the University of Iceland and Reykjavik. So and talking to some fellow astronomers, so a whole lot of stuff here that I can't wait to share with you. All right. Dangerous. It's a dangerous connection. Dangerous not because there's evidence of direct interaction between compounds and the will. It is a possibility. Because connections raise cultural and ethical issues for me. Some of the material is steeped in mistake stories. And so I have a question about how to take Indigenous traditional wisdom and Western history and science and present it in a way that doesn't make it clear that I think that Western, that our sacred stories and our traditional wisdom needs to be validated by Western history. So this is kind of what I grabbed with, and it raises some questions for me. So, for names respect, our Anishanaabe Migration Story, which we'll hear from Joe Rose just a little bit. The Icelandic Sagas, Mashjkiiziibii Ojibwa Saga, was the father of the Emerita, and Vikings Saga, European explorer accounts, and non-Indigenous astronomy. And again, I'm really concerned how we use these sources in a way that honors our Indigenous oral traditions without suggesting that our stories be validated by outsiders. Okay, so for those that some of you know that we have this migration story, and there's a lot of different paths into the migration from the East Coast. There's some Ojibwa scholars like Johnson there, and then they came to Great Lakes region, and then they came east, and then they came home. There's others like, and then the neighbor, the beautiful book, says that Anishanaabe once descended and descended into the Great Lakes region, and then something happened and went east, and then came back. I talked to Ojibwa elders who say, hey, you guys were at Cocoa back in the 1100s. Not only there, Ojibwa there, it was like old Rush, everybody been there because, glaciers had melted and it was, the ground was so uninhabitable that everybody left, and once the glaciers receded and the land dried out, we went back to our homeland. So there are all these stories that may or may not be, they're real to the people that tell them. Together, they create a different narrative. We don't know, but it is, everybody agrees that at some point, the Ojibwa were on the East Coast, a crisis happened, big shell, clear sky, we followed it, set up places, and we returned to places where food was on water. The wildlife was very restoration. So here it is, migration story, Joe. Here's a map. So if you're here, in the Gulf of Mexico region, and there is seven stop places. There's Turkish Island, and Niagara Falls, places of Thunder Water. There's Detroit, present-day Detroit, Manitoulin Island, Sault Ste. Marie. Then the group splits. One contingent goes north, the other goes south. They meet at what's present-day Division, and then go back to Schwingen, and they find a whole lot of rice that say, okay, this is where we're supposed to be. That's taking a very long time. But I don't know how this works. Okay, so here's Joe Rose, wonderful elder, my mentor. Today I'm right here, I stopped the great gentleman, professor from college, and just all around. And here's his story of migration. Okay.
The original homeland went right there, one great area. And then our time fell on people. And so some people went to their elders and spiritual leaders, and that's where it went away. And so the elders and acquired witness and knowledge from the spirit world. And they were able to live the place where the sun is morning. And that's east. And so they were told to prepare for a journey to the east. And so that journey took generations. And they finally got to the great saltwater barrier that called the Atlantic Ocean. And then they lived there for many streams of lives, so hard times fell upon them again. And so again, they received messages from the spirit world. And then they were excited to follow. And one of these signs was called the Memphis. The Memphis is a sacred seashell. And we were told to follow the Memphis. The first place that appeared was the island along the St. River on the east coast. And then that migration proceeded from primarily the island to Niagara Falls, to Detroit, from there, and then we went to Australia, Trinity Island, Niagara Falls, Madeline Island, and then that's there were two groups. One group lived at one north of Lake Superior, the other group lived at one south of Lake Superior, and then over on the River by Lake Superior. And they about and they found the food that was growing in the water. That was the island that they were supposed to live over. And so they just got off and they found the food that was growing in the water. But they were also told that they wouldn't be home again until maybe 6 years or so. So they went over to the highway over there and they visited them, I meditated. And the message that came to them and they were to double back to a place called morning. Today that highway over there, they're all like Superior home. And they were the key over there. But anyway, they came back to Madeline Island. Morning. Madeline Island. They made the home, the and so, to make a theory about the shores of Madeline Island, for some time, and I know that they were home. They sent their scouts around from well, they were pretty familiar with the territory already, but they sent their scouts across flew over to the cotton sloughs, and then found the other growing more profusely than they had ever seen it anyway, anywhere in the cotton sloughs. And so that was the secret from that time on. So every time we have a feast or a ceremony, we always include the wildlife and onion, because the way such an important role in our migration story, and one of the signs was with the people on the migration journey.
So that's so whenever we talk about history, we have these cultural conflicts because I was trained as a typical Western historian and history is you start at the starting date and then finish with the ending date, plug in all the names, dates, and events, preferences, and wars between those places. And you create a timeline and you provide evidence. People that think about traditional knowledge, traditional history, it's not like that. It's not about time, it's about place. History is place-based. Everything that's worth remembering is organized around that place. So for us, wildlife, we remember migration, you have ceremonies, we think about this education, language, everything is place-based, it's all about meaning. So why is more important than when? And for a lot of people, a long time ago, it is that's all. I remember, the 1,000-day whole show we used to call people don't know why but we used to call the 5 nations or 6 nations or Iroquois Confederacy. Anyway, when was the Confederacy founded? So some researchers went on that, looking at oral history about the Confederacy was founded in the month of the rising sun, when the month of the rising corn, when the sun went dark in the sky. Okay, so August, that's when the rises, and sun would go dark sky, solar eclipse. So they looked at and plotted all the solar eclipses that would have been visible in the state of New York during the month of August. And came back and said, hooray! 3:17 p.m. 14th, 11:42. And so, I'm aware of this bias about time and time being not as important as meaning. Having said that, let's talk about time. Okay, what did the really arrive at? And this is what's always ranked. If you read Western history, a lot of those historians say, oh, wait, so that refugee tribe that led the Haudenosaunee during the wars, they got guns before you got guns. They got out of the Dutch and the English, and they ran out of there. And really things are our stories. That's not part of our narrative. And so this is always really bothering me. You look at our own stories, like Emerita, migration began, he says, the social by 900 years before present, and took 500 years completely. William Moore, another kind of historian, historian, said that in his book, the way arrived at Madeline 10 years before Columbus landed on the world, and he cites this commonality that one way has, that extrapolated how long each leader led the community and came up with this figure. Okay, so we're talking about if we believe and my Lord, this migration happened sometime between the 10th and the 14th century, right? So, what's going on with the Vikings? Well, and primarily Saga, and Great Saga. Eric was the father of Vikings, who most of you are part of it. He was the son of Thorvald, who was banished from Norway and resettled in Iceland, and he was the badass. He was banished from Iceland, and in 982, before Christ, he sets out to explore Greenland and Labrador and perhaps, and now I think it was less likely from Sparta. The Greenland Saga is more of what's going to be a Red Saga, but there are these really vivid descriptions of interactions between Norse colonists and Indigenous people here in America. This is what's blew my mind. This is where the Vikings were going. In the year 700, 800, they were, they were everywhere. That's right. I mean, they had explored all Scandinavia. They're sailing down the whole river, down to the Caspian Sea, over to Baghdad. They're exploring and terrorizing the area, the whole Mediterranean. The British Isles are subject to raid. And then Eric and his buddies have some problems in Iceland. And so they're going west because they can't go east. They've got big problems and nobody wants to see them. So they're going west, and Eric names this island of ice and snow Greenland. Because they're colors in Norway or Iceland, and somebody's trying to convince you to up your life and go somewhere else. Greenland sounds like and I mean, that's this place, but it's and so they are now traveling around North America and establishing colonies in Newfoundland and Vinland, and lots of meadows is, how many of you have heard of lots of meadows? Okay, this is a Norse colony, it's absolutely, I want to tell you more about lots of meadows. They reconstructed, this is what it would look like in the late 900s and early 1000s. Sod houses, long houses, and what made the Vikings metallurgy. They were masters of working metal. And their smelting metal and slag is leftover from the smelting process. The reason the Vikings were able to travel the world is they were master shipbuilders because they fashioned nails, but they figured out how to galvanize them. And so they lost. And now they're finding all these really interesting ship repair sites on the East Coast, perhaps even down Florida, some people think. I mean, they are really master explorers. One of the things that's really tantalizing about lots of meadows is they found butternuts. This is how they were able, you can only reincarnate organic material. So they find butternuts in lots of meadows. And they're able to reincarnate this colony to like the year 1002 or 1003. The interesting thing about butternuts is they don't go anywhere in Finland, nowhere in Labrador, nowhere in New Brunswick, nowhere in Prince Edward Island. The only place they grow, the closest place they grow is in I'm sorry, I think Nova Scotia, not Nova Scotia, is New Brunswick, which is that one of the big things. The Gulf Coast is Florida. So this is really kind of interesting. There's another major archaeological excavation here, and they're finding that Vinland probably is not in Midland, probably is not at Los Meadows. It's most likely in New Brunswick, present-day New Brunswick. So looking at sagas, there is descriptions. The boat they dragged behind the ship was built with grapes. A cargo position from the cut, and when spring came, they made sure ready and sailed away from the name of Vinland. Grapes did not grow like butternuts. They didn't grow in Finland or Nova Scotia, etc. They grow in New Brunswick. And here's another, Finland, okay, is leaf giving this community an aspirational name, trying to give people out as their really line, and the Vikings say, like the line. So here's this community that has great robots. So maybe lots of meadows was given an aspirational name, and actually the Great Grace was much farther south. So Great Grace was in 10th century earlier in the area. So maybe this was scholarship, the Greenland thing. Oh yeah, that's nice. Yeah, we've got great robots. Well, they're much farther south. All right, so where is it? This is most likely, this is where Great Grace was start. This is New Brunswick. This is also St. Lawrence. This is Mount St. Lawrence River. This is where the Ojibwa in the 10th and 11th century. People living in the Ojibwa stories. And that tells us somewhere short Great South Sea. And that's your history, Western guy, probably living on Mount St. Lawrence. Roy, who's that's academic in the University of Texas, Austin, and Ojibwa, lived near the Mount St. Lawrence River, Virtual Road, St. Lawrence. So, both Ojibwa and Vikings Our present day focuses on area 10 centuries. Okay, in the sagas, the top of Australia, this is the description, this is the words that we use to describe Indigenous people of America that the Vikings had. Both the red and the green sagas describe encounters between the Vikings and Indigenous people. Mostly covered by violence. In one case, it's really interesting. One would they lived there, they wish Eric's son who dies there. In another episode of Vikings, they sleeping in their Syrian canoes. Okay. Would they have confused birch bark for skin? Probably not. They're just so it suggests that they met a group of Indigenous people who were not Ojibwa, who were in skin boats, maybe who would have been using skin boats at that time. In another encounter, Vikings killed and children who were taken back to where they were baptized. And I just read an article about a whole family in Iceland that has been there, and they did a genetic testing, and they got this swab of Native American blood. So really interesting. But in addition to these survival matters, there's also trade. They're trading with each other. So they're, hand in hand, hand contact. The Australians want weapons. They like those nice that the Vikings had. And then the pelts they want to trade. And the Vikings want pelts, and they want wood for their boats. But they won't trade weapons, and instead trade red cloth and milk. So you can see a problem with Native Americans getting along. Many of us are lactose intolerant today. We were lactose intolerant. We didn't have domesticated animals. So I can imagine that people got really sick. And a couple of days later, unsurprisingly, the spread was attacked on March. Excerpts from the sagas. They come in weather fought. There was a great shower of missiles. The spreads had war slings and catapults. And then, so at this point, Eric the Red and his extended family they know that the language was good. There was always war and terror and those who were there before them. They made ready there for move away with intent to go to their own land. So they leave permanently. Remember that clock? 500 years later, there are French explorers who see a non-speaking people with little bits of red hair, red cloth in their hair. They're wearing that as a burden. Where did get that? Because they were the first Europeans to see, where did they get that? And you can imagine that cloth gets traded in the trade routes and probably been passed down. And 500 years later, it's still there in the communities. All right, so I have all these questions. Did you give way to Vikings? The skin boats suggest that this is not an encounter. They did not. But it's absolutely possible that the Ojibwa are trading with other communities who have interacted regularly with Vikings. And is this the point that those European diseases get introduced in trade routes, and now the Ojibwa are in crisis? Remember our migration story? It's a crisis that sets us going back to our places, our original homeland. So are these, are the diseases, the crisis that described in prophecies? And how does someone like you use these sources in a way that's respectful of our Indigenous knowledge and their six stories? Okay. Here's where I get really nervous, because now these, and I'm comfortable enough to talk about the sacred dishes. Edmund wrote about it, Joe wrote, it's been documentary, so this is part of our story. But it's still a sacred part of our story. And I'm not a member of the daily one, I'm just starting to learn the language, and, so I have some trepidation about just dabbling in this. And so I'm more comfortable just setting it out there and not trying to connect them. So here's what Eddie Benton says about this show. This was probably the first player. If you do not know, you'll be destroyed. The sacred Venus will lead the way to the chosen ground of the Anishanaabe. Prophet of the third fire. The Anishanaabe will find the path to their chosen ground, the land to the west, which they must move their families. This will be the land where the food grows on water. Okay, so we have a sacred native show. Something extraordinary happens in 1054, and it's documented pictographically by Hopi, and it's written down by Arabic and East Indian astronomers. And let me show you what that is and how NASA recreated it. Nebula, supernova, so bright you can see it in the daytime sky for 3 months. Isn't that interesting? Everybody see that? Should I do it again? Oh, it doesn't want to, oh, there it goes. Yeah. Okay, this really tantalized me. And the Crab Nebula supernova was so dramatic. It was visible in the daytime sky for 3 months. In the daytime sky for 3 months. And visible in the nighttime sky for nearly 3 years. I am not going to say this is the sacred Mini show. I'm just not comfortable. I'm not the right person. I'm not sure there's any person who would be comfortable saying that the two are the same. What Joe Rose told me was he thought perhaps the supernova must have been so dramatic that it gets remembered, it gets inserted into our story and remembered along with our migration story. That was his feeling. So, my questions, should this research be undertaken? If so, how do I use non-native sources in a culturally responsible way? Am I the right researcher? Do I have, the depth of knowledge to explore sacred connections and this history? And what value does this research bring? And this is a question, I was a professor for 30 years, and I would always tell my journalism students, just because something is interesting doesn't mean that you have the right to make it public. You have to have a better reason. There has to be some value to exploring something and sharing it publicly. So, this is the question that I've come back to now for 10 years. What value is this? And for me, the value is, this, I think, is some pretty interesting evidence that really refutes this whole notion of the Ojibwe being refugee tribes and barely unpacking their suitcases in the 1700s before the United States of America was formed. And not that, you know, it gives us more ownership to this area, because I don't think the Ojibwe really think about their relationship to the land in that way. But it's evidence that we had a relationship in the Great Lakes much, much, much earlier than what, you know, the master narrative of Western history is. So that's the part of it that keeps me, you know, wanting to kind of push the envelope on this and talk to people in forums like this to get some feedback. So here are the dots. Not going to connect them, but just put them out there. The Ojibwe story, the migration story, the Icelandic sagas, and archaeological evidence all indicate that the Ojibwe and the Vikings were in the present-day Gulf of St. Lawrence area in the 10th and 11th centuries. Ojibwe prophecies reference light-skinned people that are either going to create chaos, bring crisis, or they're going to, if they have the right attitude, bring innovation and happiness and blessings. The Icelandic sagas describe encounters, both peaceful and violent, between the Vikings and the native people. Not necessarily the Ojibwe, but native people who are in the same geographic proximity. And there's a crisis that develops that sends the Ojibwe back to their original homes. Is this the introduction of European diseases, either through direct contact or more likely spread to them via the Indian trade routes? And then the supernova crab nebula explodes in the mid-11th century. Does it correspond somehow to the prophecies involving the Migration? So my approach has been to collaborate with Ojibwe elders, historians, Midwayland members, collaborate with Icelandic Sagas scientists and specialists, collaborate with ethno-archaeologists, and avoid publication, and maybe avoid it permanently, who knows. At this point, I'm retired, I don't need to publish this. And so, you know, I want to make sure that I'm doing this in the right way, sharing it with the right people, and if it's useful enough to push that timeline back from this Western narrative of us being refugee tribes that don't get here until the 1700s, maybe, you know, maybe if I can answer that question, maybe then I maybe it'll never get published, that's all right. But I thank you for listening to me. But I also am really, I'd be really grateful for some advice. So if you have some comments, I am interested in getting feedback. So please ask questions or make comments. Yes?
Have there been any studies of the DNA that was in Iceland versus the Ojibwe DNA? See if there's a correlation.
There's definitely Native American DNA. I don't think they know exactly, you know, they haven't pinpointed what tribal group it is, but there's definitely Native DNA in Iceland.
Yay!
Icelanders
We
here?
have an Iceland.
Oh! What a great country, but boy, you love your double consonants, don't you? There are words, your traffic signs are so long. But my favorite, I learned I'm pronouncing this right. Glugenweather?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So, Glugenweather means window weather, which, and it's what happens when you look outside and it's sunny and it's beautiful and you open the door and go, holy, it's really cold. So they call it window weather. It's, anyway, I love my time in Iceland, and I really enjoyed collaborating with my Icelandic colleague. Yeah.
Patty, this is fabulous. I've never heard anybody more self-aware, more self-critical, more holding all the complexities of these different versions of doing history, ever.
Bravo.
Oh, thank
Bravo. Keep going,
Yes.
because you're gonna teach historians something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to do it in a humble way, and I'm trying to think about what Ojibwa elders who, know so much more than I do, how they might think about this kind of research and wonder whether they will be interested in it or whether they think, wow, she's, pretty uppity looking at some of these sources that maybe she shouldn't be dabbling in. So I'm aware of that, and
Yeah.
this is why I'm trying to tread as
And there are
carefully as I
1,000 reasons for that.
Yeah.
And just try not to get reactive.
Yeah, well, trying to be open and honest and humble, and
Beautiful work.
thank you.
I was just gonna add a couple dots because there's some pretty good independent climate evidence for this span of time that you're looking at the medieval warm period and then the little ice age. The Vikings were at their heyday during that warm period.
Yeah.
And then they clearly document that they're being frozen in to harbors and starving in the 1400s. And the crisis here it didn't actually extend very far into North America, but it affected the East Coast. So that climate overlay might be an interesting thing to consider.
Oh, that's another really interesting thread. I'm gonna add that to my list of trepidations. Yes.
Do you have any thoughts about the movement of copper mined in this area and its travels throughout the world and how this might figure in with the stories you're looking at?
Well, I've been to Cahokia, and there are some really interesting artifacts there, copper items that absolutely came from this area of the Western Great Lakes region. And there's also, there's a cave in southwestern Wisconsin called Godhall Cave. And they found, this is a little bit off the topic, but this is another thing that just really fascinates me. So there are pictographs in this cave that are pre-Columbian, and there are soils, man-made soils, that only exist in eastern Cherokee burial sites. And there's pottery shards that are consistent with the effigy mound builders. And they're all in this cave. And there's an anthropologist whose name I won't share, from Beloit College, who spent his entire life doing research on this cave. And I asked him, like, well, what did the Ho-Chunk say about this cave? And he said, this culture way predates the Ho-Chunk hadn't evolved into a monotonic. I was like, okay, well, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not going to argue with him, but I thought, boy, if I was doing research in an area, I certainly would invite them. So, a couple of years later, I'm with a scientist, cultural geographer from UW-Madison, who was much more inclusive, shall we say, who invited, I forget his name. No, it wasn't, it was before, anyway, invites the Ho-Chunk elder into the cave. And the Ho-Chunk elder looks at him and goes, oh, that's the Redhorn story. Here, Redhorn's fighting the giants, and he's, Thunderbird, and the storms as he walks, and they're, and then over here, and he explains the whole pictograph in this cave. And, so And I thought, whoa, I wish that boy, that's wrong. But as it turns out, another anthropologist, 100 years earlier, had actually written down this hero cycle, is what they call it, the Redhorn story. And Redhorn was a Ho-Chunk figure who fights the giants. And if you've ever been to Madison, there's an area called Astalon, which was the Cahokians' northern outpost, basically. And they built temple mounds, they didn't build effigy mounds. And that area was palisaded, so they were trying to protect themselves from somebody. And I'm down in Cahokia, and I'm, visiting their fabulous center there. And I talked to the curator and said, just out of curiosity, how tall were the Cahokians back in the, 11th century? And he said, oh, they were, the theocrats who got buried at the top of them, they were like over 6 feet. Oh, go back to the Ho-Chunk. How tall would the Ho-Chunk have been? Well, they were quite short. They were like 5 feet something. I'm thinking, oh, this is really interesting, the giants, right? And so, those are the kinds of dots that I find really interesting. And here's this cave that's got the Redhorn, and if you go to Cahokia, there are Redhorn figurines there that are from Cahokia. There's copper plates from the Great Lakes region, from this area. There's Eastern Cherokee burial mounds, which is consistent with the Astalon, the giants, and the pottery shards from the Ho-Chunk, effigy mound builders. So there's a lot of really interesting intersections between cultures here. And I just think it's really fascinating to speculate about how they all fit together. That was a really long, I detoured tremendously. Yeah, there's copper that was there's also turquoise from Chocolate Canyon in Colorado. So there's all kinds of stuff.
But it does bring the point that if the Vikings did make way through the Great Lakes, that they may have came across many indigenous cultures and eventually to Ojibwa, correct?
Yeah, there isn't any evidence that they actually made it into the Great Lakes region. There was a hoax in Minnesota where they found some ruins and some old Viking coins. But they pretty much decided that the guy whose farm that those things were dug up on salted the mine. There until the early 1800s, there really wasn't a clear waterway all the way through St. Lawrence down into the Great Lakes.
How about the skin boat? So where would that be through?
Those skin boats are really consistent with the kinds of boats that the Mi'kmaq, the indigenous people who were more in the maritime provinces were, Nova Scotia? Yeah. So, there's some speculation that, maybe the Vikings didn't, they confused birch bark with skin boats, but they had birch in Norway and, boreal forests and things, so I don't think that was the case. Yes?
I'm wondering if there's any transfer of women's parts, for example, in fabric or weaving, or the men were wearing, a lot of metal stuff. They had stuff for women. So they must have been cloth of some sort, woven usually by women.
Well, this red cloth is really I think that's really tantalizing that they would have had, bolts.
And it's made up of what?
Well, they wove it. They wove it, and what passed for commercial dye in the Middle Ages, but they had a much more sophisticated dyeing process. Here we were using berries but the natural the natural colors were not as vibrant as they were, you know, the Viking women, the
The
Norse
red
women.
cloth, was that red cloth made by men?
No, I think, well, I shouldn't say, I don't really know.
Because if it's in ships and what have you, that might have been men's work. But the clothes, the things the guys get warm in underneath all that metal
Yeah,
might have been women's work.
yeah.
And that might have transferred,
I didn't find any mention of, there's some really interesting passages about women in the sagas. Freya, who's the, has anybody read, oh, you read, I mean, Freya? Wow, I mean, this was a warrior woman who, at one point, they are attacking an indigenous village and kind of getting their butts handed to them, and the Viking men retreat, and she bears a breast and scared, I mean, and that just scared the lights out of it. The indigenous people, the indigenous warriors who turned around and ran. Yeah, it's a woman, and holy, yeah. So, a lot of the sagas are just almost like Genesis, where it's this you know, genealogy, and so-and-so was the son of so-and-so, and he got so-and-so, and this and that. But in between some of the genealogy, there's just these really, really wild stories. And Freya's like, I want to be her in the next
Bonjour, Anishanaabe Migration Story. So, thanks for coming. My name is Nigani. I'm originally from Sault Ste. Marie. And I too have done some research as an academic Ojibwa. And if I was looking for guidance on this, I would probably, if you haven't already, I would take my Asema to Keith Smith.
Keith Smith?
Keith Smith, he comes to Bad River once a month. And then I'd also give some to Wawakayash Keller Pat down at LCO. He's from Redcliffe originally, and I would give some too to Wagosh, Tony Troyer. He's an academic, but also lodge leader. Yeah, and so I think they would offer some good guidance to you if you haven't talked to them already.
Nice.
Miigwech.
Ahosh.
Can I stop you afterwards and let me write down those
Of course.
things?
You get to go.
Yeah? I'm ready. Let's go.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., you can hear Patty again. She's going to be talking about the importance of world history. And the Madeline Island Historic Preservation Association is a co-sponsor with us because they've been doing some wonderful oral histories too here on the island. So that's only the beginning of the whole afternoon of wonderful programs put on at the Flicker House, which is down the way. And it's totally free and going back if you have more interest. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Mike, and the museum staff. If you'd like to provide feedback, go up to the board.
Wait.